Margaret Maggie Johnson had always hated the sound of church bells. They tolled too heavy, too final, too merciless, like a judge's gavel pounding against the wood. Now, at 63 years old, she sat in the front pew of St. Mary's Chapel, her body trembling beneath her black dress. The fabric clung to her curves in uncomfortable ways, reminding her of how she had aged, how her life had stretched long with struggle. Her dark skin, warm brown like coffee with too much cream, shone with tears she had not been able to wipe away fast enough. The casket at the altar seemed unreal, polished mahogany, a small bouquet of lilies resting on top. The nameplate, Ernest Johnson, beloved husband and father. Her Ernest gone. The pastor's words blurred in her ears, something about life everlasting, the kingdom of heaven, God's embrace. But Maggie's mind was far away, lost in fragments of memory. Ernest fixing bikes in their small-town shop with his calloused hands. Ernest teaching their sons, Caleb and Marcus, how to fish in the river. Ernest holding Maggie close under the dim light of their kitchen, dancing to an old Al Green record. They had been together 40 years. She had built her world around him, and now that world was buried in a box. Her chest tightened, suffocating her. She tried to glance at her sons for strength. Caleb, the older one, sat stiffly in the row behind her, his jaw set, his eyes dry. Marcus scrolled quickly on his phone when he thought nobody was watching, his expression cold and distracted. Neither of them looked broken. Neither of them looked like men who had just lost their father. Something about it stabbed her heart, and then her phone vibrated in her purse. Maggie jumped at the intrusion, startled by the sudden buzz during the solemn hush of the funeral. At first she ignored it, telling herself it was probably another neighbor sending condolences. But the vibration came again. Hesitant, she slipped the phone out, shielding the screen behind the cover of her purse. One message, from an unknown number. Her blood turned to ice. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. Trust no one. Maggie's hands began to shake so violently she nearly dropped the phone. Her breath hitched in her throat. She blinked, reading the words again, as if repetition might make them disappear. No, impossible. Ernest was dead. She had seen his body at the hospital, pale and still. She had signed the papers. She had kissed his cold forehead. With trembling fingers, she typed back before reason could stop her. Who are you? The reply came instantly, as if the sender had been waiting. I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust Caleb. Don't trust Marcus. Her heart slammed so hard against her ribs, she thought she might faint. Don't trust her sons. Her sons, the boys she had carried, nursed, raised with every ounce of love in her body. She glanced at them again. Caleb's face remained carved in stone, eyes locked on the casket. Marcus pocketed his phone and adjusted his expensive watch, sighing impatiently. For the first time in her life, Maggie felt something foreign when she looked at them. Not love, not pride, but suspicion. The pastor's sermon ended. People began to stand. The funeral director gestured for the family to come forward for the final farewell. Maggie stumbled up, clutching the pew for balance, her eyes darting between the coffin and her phone. Could it be true? Could Ernest really be alive? If so, who lay inside that box? Her body moved on autopilot, her mind unraveling. She placed her hand on the smooth surface of the casket, her reflection warped in the polished wood. She whispered, too softly for anyone else to hear, Ernest, is that you? No answer, of course, but the phone in her purse vibrated again. Another message. Stay strong, Mags. The truth is darker than you think. The rest of the day passed in a blur. People offered condolences, shook her hand, hugged her. She nodded, smiled faintly, but their words slid off her like rain on glass. Inside, her thoughts screamed. Back at the Johnson family home, a modest 2-story house with peeling paint and a garden, Ernest had tended Maggie moved through the rooms like a ghost. The smell of coffee still lingered in the kitchen. Ernest's coat still hung on the rack by the door. His reading glasses lay folded neatly on the nightstand. Everywhere she turned, he was there, and yet he wasn't. Her sons followed her home after the burial. Caleb busied himself pouring whiskey into crystal glasses, drinking deeply without offering her any. Marcus sat sprawled on the couch, flipping through TV channels as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Mom, Caleb said at last, his voice too even, we'll need to talk about Dad's insurance soon. And the house. It's too much for you alone. Insurance, house, money, not a word about grief, not a word about love. Maggie swallowed her disgust. She had no proof yet, only a phone full of cryptic messages, but deep inside, a seed of dread sprouted. She excused herself to the bedroom, locking the door behind her. She sat heavily on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, staring at the unknown number. Her thumbs hovered over the screen. Finally, she typed, "If you are Ernest, prove it." Minutes stretched into an eternity. Just as doubt began to creep in, her phone buzzed again. "Check the old oak tree. Our initials. You'll know it's me," Maggie gasped. The oak tree in Riverton Park, the place where she and Ernest had carved M+E= forever when they were 20, a secret only they shared. Her chest heaved. Her husband was alive. And if he was alive, then her sons might not just be distant or cold, they might be dangerous. That night, sleep would not come. Maggie lay awake listening to every creak of the house, every car that passed on the street outside. At 3 a.m, she rose, threw on a heavy coat, and slipped out into the night. Riverton Park was deserted, the giant oak looming like a sentinel in the darkness. She approached slowly, flashlight trembling in her hand. There, beneath the rough bark, the carving remained faded but legible. M+E= forever. And wedged into a crack in the bark was a folded piece of paper. Her heart pounded as she pried it free by the weak glow of the flashlight. She read the words scrawled in Ernest's unmistakable handwriting. "If you're reading this, Mags, then I failed to stop them. Don't trust the boys. They want everything. Be careful. I love you." Maggie staggered back, the note fluttering in her shaking hands. The shadows seemed to thicken around her. For the first time in her life, she wished she hadn't given birth, because the children she had raised with love might be the very ones trying to destroy her. Clarissa Johnson had never been a woman to doubt her instincts. As a nurse for more than 3 decades, her gut had often saved live-spotting sepsis before the monitors, recognizing when a patient's slurred speech wasn't exhaustion but the creeping shadow of a stroke. Yet nothing in her career had prepared her for the cold knot tightening in her stomach the day she began sorting through Ernest's papers. At first, she told herself it was just busy work, something to do with her hands, something to distract her mind from the thick, aching silence of the house without him. She spread his files across the oak dining table, the same table where their family once shared Sunday dinners with cornbread, collard greens, and laughter that rattled the walls. Now it was covered in folders, statements, and a scattering of unpaid bills. Clarissa adjusted her reading glasses and frowned. She had never been the one to manage the finances. Ernest had insisted on that. "You take care of the people, baby," he used to say, his baritone voice warm and reassuring. "I'll take care of the numbers." And she had trusted him, because Ernest was the kind of man whose word carried the weight of truth. But as she scanned the papers, something immediately stood out. An unfamiliar insurance policy, dated only 6 months earlier. Her eyes narrowed. Policyholder, Ernest Johnson. Beneficiaries, Charles Johnson and Henry Johnson. Coverage, $1 million. Clarissa blinked. $1 million. Their previous policy had been a modest $150,000, a safety net, not a jackpot, and the beneficiaries had always included her. Yet here she was, entirely absent from the document. Her throat tightened as she flipped through the folder, finding more changes to the deed of the house, power of attorney forms with her son's signatures, even a notarized document that seemed to strip her of rights she hadn't even known she had. Her hands trembled. When had this happened? Why hadn't Ernest told her? And then came the memory, vivid and sudden, of her sons standing in the hospital, their faces carefully composed, too calm for men who had just lost their father. Charles with his expensive watch glinting under the fluorescent lights, Henry tapping his phone, murmuring something about processing the paperwork. Clarissa had been too wrapped in grief to question it then. Now, the recollection felt sinister. The anonymous message from the funeral rang in her ears like a bell. "I am still alive. Don't trust our sons." She pressed a hand against her chest, her pulse hammering. If Ernest was alive, then why this charade? Why forge papers and push through policies that cut her out entirely? The realization struck her with cruel clarity, because the money was never meant for her. It was meant for them. 2 days later, Clarissa found herself sitting in the corner booth of a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of town. The vinyl seats stuck to her skin, and the hum of the neon open sign buzzed faintly in the background. She had arranged to meet the anonymous messenger, though every rational part of her screamed not to. She ordered coffee, black, and tried to steady her breathing. At 66, Clarissa carried herself with quiet dignity. But tonight she felt exposed. Like a child waiting for the principal's verdict, a man slid into the booth across from her without asking. He was in his late 30s, wiry, with restless eyes that darted to the door before settling on her. "You're Clarissa," he said. It wasn't a question. Clarissa straightened her spine. "And you are Stephen," he replied. "Private investigator. Ernest hired me 3 months ago." The name dropped between them like a stone into a well. Clarissa gripped her cup tighter. "He hired you. For what?" Stephen leaned forward, lowering his voice. "To keep an eye on your boys." He suspected something was wrong, and he was right. Clarissa's breath caught. She wanted to argue, to defend Charles and Henry, but the folder in her purse, the one stuffed with forged documents, silenced her. Stephen slid a small envelope across the table. "These are copies of what I found. Your sons have been planning this for months. Insurance fraud, property transfers, and worse." He paused, his eyes flickering with discomfort. "There's evidence Ernest's accident wasn't an accident." Clarissa's stomach lurched. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Stephen said evenly, "they tried to kill their own father." The diner's hum faded, replaced by the roar of blood in her ears. Clarissa stared at him, unable to form words. Stephen continued, his tone gentler now. "Ernest suspected it. He told me he was afraid but didn't want to worry you. The last message you got, that was me. Ernest wrote it down before he disappeared. Her voice cracked. "Is he alive or not?" Stephen's gaze dropped. "I don't know. The hospital records don't add up. There's no death certificate filed. At least, not a legitimate one. I think your sons covered their tracks before we could uncover the truth." Clarissa pressed a trembling hand to her lips. If Ernest was alive, where was he? If he wasn't, then what had really happened in that hospital? That night, back home, Clarissa sat in her bedroom, surrounded by Ernest's photographs. Their wedding picture from 1977, her in a lace dress and him in a cream-colored suit. A photo of them holding baby Charles, her hair braided neatly, Ernest's smile radiant with pride, and another of Henry's graduation, the 4 of them together. The perfect family, or so it seemed. She whispered into the silence, "Ernest, what did they do to you?" Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number lit the screen. "They will come for you next. Trust no one." Clarissa's heart stuttered. The warning was no longer just about Ernest. It was about her. She rose, moving to the dresser where Ernest's old revolver lay hidden in the bottom drawer, wrapped in a handkerchief. He had kept it for just in case, though they had never needed it. Her fingers brushed the cold steel, and she felt both comforted and terrified. For the first time in her life, Clarissa realized she was not just a widow piecing together her husband's secrets. She was prey, caught in the shadows of her own blood. And if she wanted to survive, if she wanted justice, she would have to fight. Clarissa had always known her sons were different. Charles, the elder, had inherited Ernest's height and jawline, but none of his warmth. He was ambitious, always chasing the next big opportunity. His charm like polished brass, shiny at first glance, but hollow inside. Henry the younger was quieter, more calculating. He had Ernest's eyes, but a mind that moved like chess pieces. Cold and deliberate. As children, they had been sweet enough. Though even then Clarissa sensed something brittle beneath their smiles. Ernest used to brush it off. "Boys will be boys, Cla. They'll grow out of it." But the boys never grew out of it. They grew into it now, standing at the kitchen counter. Clarissa stared at the insurance documents again, bile rising in her throat. The betrayal was as sharp as a blade. Her own flesh and blood plotting against the man who had raised them. And perhaps against her too. She poured herself sweet tea into a tall glass, but the ice clinked like warning bells. The house was too quiet. The silence pressed on her ears until the crunch of tires on gravel outside made her freeze. Charles's BMW, through the lace curtains, she watched him step out. Expensive shoes, tailored suit, hair slicked back like he was walking into a boardroom instead of his mother's modest home. He didn't knock, he just opened the door and let himself in. "Mom," he said smoothly, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You should lock your doors. Neighborhood's not what it used to be." Clarissa forced her lips into a polite curve. "What brings you here, Charles?" He shrugged, tossing his keys on the counter. "Just checking in, making sure you're holding up." Her eyes narrowed. "Or, making sure I haven't found anything I shouldn't." Charles tilted his head, the smile faltering for just a second before sliding back into place. "You always were dramatic, Mum." She said nothing, clutching her glass so tightly she feared it might shatter. Henry arrived 20 minutes later, as if on cue. He was dressed down jeans, a hoodie, but his eyes were sharp as knives. Together, the brothers filled the kitchen with an energy that prickled Clarissa's skin. "So," Henry said, leaning against the fridge. Have you gone through Dad's stuff yet? The question was casual, too casual. Clarissa's pulse quickened. Some of it. Charles exchanged a look with Henry, subtle but unmistakable. Then Charles stepped closer, lowering his voice. Mom, listen, we know Dad left some things in order before he passed. Insurance, the house. He wanted us to take responsibility. For you, for everything. For me, she echoed, anger cutting through her fear. He left me out of all of it. Do you expect me to believe that was his idea? Charles's jaw tightened. Henry's gaze hardened. You don't understand, Henry said flatly. Dad was tired. He trusted us to handle things. Clarissa's heart pounded. Their lies were thin, but their confidence made them dangerous. She took a step back, gripping the edge of the counter. If your father trusted you so much, she said, her voice shaking but steady, why do I keep getting anonymous warnings not to trust you? The words hung in the air like smoke. Charles froze, his mask slipping. Henry's lips thinned. For a moment, the kitchen was silent except for the ticking of the old wall clock. Finally, Charles forced a laugh. Anonymous warnings. Mom, someone's messing with you. You shouldn't listen to. But Clarissa cut him off, her voice sharp as broken glass. Did you kill him? The question shattered the room. Charles's face darkened. Henry's eyes flashed, and for the first time, she saw something unmasked in both of them. Something feral. Henry leaned forward, his voice low and icy. Careful, Mom. Charles recovered quickly, plastering on another fake smile. We'd never hurt Dad. You're grieving. That's all. Don't let paranoia eat you alive. But Clarissa's hands shook not from grief now, but from rage. She wanted to scream, to throw the documents in their smug faces, but she knew better. She was alone in the house with them, and something in their eyes told her that if she pushed too far, she might not walk away. So she swallowed her fury, lowering her gaze to her tea. You're right, she whispered. I'm just grieving. They relaxed, just enough. Henry pulled out his phone. Charles adjusted his cup, but Clarissa's mind raced. They thought they still controlled her. That was their mistake, that night. Clarissa dialed Stephen. They know, she whispered into the phone, crouched in her bathroom with the fan running to muffle her voice. They know I'm suspicious. Stephen's voice was urgent. You need to be careful. Don't confront them again, not until we have proof. I asked them if they killed Ernest. She admitted, shame heating her face. Stephen swore under his breath. Clarissa, that was dangerous. If they think you're a threat, they already do, she cut in. Her voice broke, but her resolve was steel. I need to know the truth, alive or dead. I need to know what happened to Ernest. There was a pause. Then, Stephen said quietly, then we dig deeper. But you need to trust me and trust no one else, especially not your sons. Clarissa closed her eyes, tears burning hot. They're my babies, she whispered. Not anymore, Stephen said. Not after what they've done. The next morning, Clarissa awoke to the sound of footsteps on her porch. She peeked through the blinds. A package sat on the welcome mat. No delivery truck in sight. Her stomach twisted as she picked it up, the cardboard box light in her hands. Inside was a flash drive and a note scrawled in shaky handwriting. For Clarissa, the truth about Ernest. Her breath caught. She plugged the drive into her laptop, her hands trembling. A video file blinked onto the screen. She clicked play. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Ernest sat in a chair, his face pale, a bruise blooming along his temple. His voice was hoarse but urgent. Clarissa, if you're watching this, it means I couldn't stop them. Charles and Henry, they're not the boys we raised. They want the money. They'll do anything. I tried to fight, but he broke off, coughing violently. Then his eyes locked on the camera, fierce even through the blur. Don't trust them. Protect yourself. And whatever happens, know that I love you. The screen went black. Clarissa clapped a hand over her mouth, a strangled sob tearing from her throat. He had known. He had warned her. Her sons weren't just liars. They were predators. And now, the hunt had begun. The video replayed in Clarissa's mind for hours after she watched it. Ernest's bruised face, his trembling voice, the desperate love in his eyes. It haunted her. But it also fueled her resolve. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't paranoid. Her sons were hiding something monstrous. By dawn, Clarissa sat at her kitchen table, the flash drive clutched in her hand like a lifeline. She called Stephen as the first light of morning filtered through the blinds. He arrived an hour later, his car parked discreetly down the street. Stephen was cautious, his eyes scanning the neighborhood before he slipped inside. Clarissa didn't waste time. She shoved the flash drive toward him. You need to see this. Stephen plugged it into his laptop. Together, they watched Ernest's desperate confession. When the screen went black, Stephen leaned back, running a hand over his jaw. Jesus, he muttered. This is worse than I thought. Clarissa gripped her mug with both hands, her knuckles white. He was alive. Stephen, they had him. My boys, her voice cracked, but she forced herself to continue. They hurt him. They planned it. Stephen's gaze hardened. This is evidence, not just suspicion. With this, we can build a case. But Ernest, is he? She couldn't finish. Stephen shook his head. I don't know. The video proves he survived the accident, at least for a time. But where he is now, we'll need more. Clarissa swallowed hard. Hope flickered in her chest. Fragile, but alive. That afternoon, Clarissa pretended to carry on with her routine. She went grocery shopping, watered the garden, and even waved to her neighbor, Mrs. Ellison, across the street. On the surface, she was just another widow trying to adjust to her new life. But inside, she was a storm. Every glance from a stranger made her wonder if Charles or Henry had sent someone to watch her. Every creak of the house set her nerves on edge. When she returned home, she found Henry waiting on the porch. Her stomach dropped. Hey, Mom, he said, smiling faintly. Thought I'd help you with the yard. The lie was transparent. Henry hated yard work. Clarissa forced a smile. That's kind of you. He followed her inside, his eyes flicking toward the dining table where she usually spread Ernest's papers. The table was bare. She had hidden everything that morning. Still, his gaze lingered a moment too long. You've been busy lately, Henry said, his tone casual but probing. Clarissa's pulse quickened. Grief keeps me restless, she replied, moving toward the kitchen. Sweet tea. Henry's smile didn't falter, but his eyes were sharp. Sure. As she poured the tea, she felt his stare burning into her back. He was looking for cracks, for signs she knew too much, and she realized, with chilling clarity, that her sons weren't just manipulative, they were predators. Predators that smelled blood. That night, Stephen called again. I've been digging into financial records. Charles bought a large quantity of methanol last year. Cash transaction, but I traced it. Methanol poisoning can look like an accident. It's consistent with what Ernest suspected. Clarissa's stomach turned. Poison, she whispered. Double quotes. Yes. And there's more. Henry's been in contact with a lawyer, shady guy, specializes in estate transfers. They've been trying to push through ownership changes behind your back. Clarissa gripped the phone tighter. So they'll not only take Ernest from me, they'll take the house too. Stephen's voice softened. Unless we stop them, but we'll need something stronger. Video, audio's something that ties them directly to the plan. Clarissa closed her eyes. For the first time in her life, she wished she hadn't raised such cunning sons. Their intelligence, once a source of pride, now terrified her, but she also felt a flicker of fire in her chest. They had underestimated her. She wasn't the fragile widow they thought. The opportunity came 2 days later. Charles invited her to dinner. He picked a fancy restaurant downtown, the kind with linen tablecloths and waiters in bow ties. He smiled too much, asked too many questions about how she was spending her time. Mom, he said, over dessert, his fork slicing through cheesecake with surgical precision, Henry and I have been talking. We think it's best if you let us handle the financial side of things. It's just too much for you right now. Stress isn't good at your age. Clarissa sipped her coffee slowly, hiding the fury that burned in her chest. That's thoughtful of you, she said, her voice steady, but I think I can manage. Charles's smile tightened. You don't want to make things harder than they need to be. For the first time, she saw the veneer crack. His tone was edged, commanding, as if he already considered her a liability. And then, in a moment that chilled her to the bone, Charles leaned forward and whispered, Dad didn't make things easy either. Look where that got him. Her blood ran cold. The words weren't just cruel, they were a confession. Clarissa forced a shaky laugh, pretending not to understand, but inside, she screamed. Later that night, she met Stephen in his car, parked under the cover of darkness near the old train station. He, as good as admitted it, Clarissa whispered, her breath fogging the glass. But I didn't record it. Stephen handed her a small device, a digital recorder, barely larger than a pen. Next time, we'll get them in their own words. Clarissa turned the device over in her hands. She was no spy, no detective, just a woman caught in a nightmare. But Ernest's bruised face flashed in her mind, and her grip tightened. She would do it, for him, for herself. The following weekend, Charles and Henry came to the house together. They claimed they wanted to help her organize Ernest's belongings. In truth, they wanted control. Clarissa hid the recorder in her apron pocket, heart hammering as she welcomed them inside. For hours, they sifted through Ernest's things, their voices casual, their laughter forced. Then, as Henry stepped into the hallway, she heard Charles mutter under his breath, "Once Mom signs the papers, we're done. No more obstacles." Henry's voice drifted back, low but clear. "And if she doesn't," Charles's reply was ice, "then we do what we did to him." The recorder captured every word. Clarissa's knees nearly buckled, but she held herself together, forcing a smile when Henry returned to the room. Inside, though, a storm raged. She finally had proof that her sons weren't just greedy, they were killers. That night, when the house was quiet, Clarissa listened to the recording again and again. Each word was a dagger to her heart. Her boys, the babies she had cradled, the men she had prayed for, had become monsters. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered into the darkness, "You won't take me to." The recorder felt heavy in Clarissa's hand, as though the plastic device carried the weight of every memory she had of Charles and Henry, tiny fists clutching hers. Awkward teenage hugs, graduation smiles. Now their voices hissed from the speaker like venom, sealing the truth she had tried so long to deny. "Then we do what we did to him." She sat at her kitchen table until dawn, the shadows stretching long across the floor. She wanted to smash the recorder, to erase the damning words, to pretend her sons weren't capable of such evil. But Ernest's weary face on that video, his warning, his love, anchored her. She couldn't protect them anymore. She had to protect herself. Stephen arrived later that morning. He looked at the recorder, then at Clarissa's red-rimmed eyes. "You got it," he said softly. "That's enough to take to the police." Clarissa hesitated. "They're still my boys, Stephen." His jaw tightened. They stopped being boys the moment they chose greed over blood. She flinched at his bluntness. But deep down, she knew he was right. Stephen slid a folder across the table. Inside were bank statements, purchase receipts, and call logs, each thread weaving the tapestry of betrayal. "We'll go to the authorities together. But you need to be careful until then. If they suspect." His voice trailed off. They both knew what would happen if Charles and Henry realized how close she was to exposing them. Clarissa tried to carry on, as if nothing had changed. But paranoia stalked her every step. At the grocery store, she caught Charles's car idling in the parking lot. When she left church on Sunday, Henry stood by the exit, smiling too wide, his hands shoved deep into his hoodie pocket. The message was clear: "We're watching you." One evening, as Clarissa watered her hydrangeas, she noticed the back gate hanging open. She always locked it. Her chest tightened. She went inside quickly, pulling Ernest's revolver from the drawer and checking the chambers with shaking hands. For the first time in her life, she slept with the gun under her pillow. The breaking point came on a stormy Thursday night. Clarissa had just finished a call with Stephen, agreeing to meet him the next morning at the police station. When the power went out, the house plunged into darkness. The hum of the refrigerator died. The air grew heavy. Her heart pounded. Lightning flashed, illuminating the living room windows. For a split second, she swore she saw a figure in the yard. She grabbed the revolver, her breath ragged. Then footsteps creaked on the porch, slow, deliberate. Clarissa's finger hovered on the trigger as the front door rattled. Someone was trying the handle. "Mom," Charles's voice called through the storm. "It's us. Let us in." Her blood froze. Another voice, Henry's, joined in. "We need to talk." Clarissa backed toward the hallway, gun trembling in her hands. "Not tonight," she shouted, forcing strength into her voice. "Come back tomorrow." The handle rattled harder. "Open the door, Mom," Charles demanded, the smooth charm gone from his tone. Now, her chest heaved. She aimed the gun at the door, though they couldn't see her. "If you come in, I'll shoot." Silence. Then the sound of footsteps retreating, swallowed by the storm. Clarissa collapsed against the wall, sobs racking her body. By morning, she felt hollow but resolute. She met Stephen in the courthouse parking lot, the recorder clutched tight in her purse. "You look like hell," Stephen said gently. "They came for me," she whispered. His face darkened. "Then we don't waste another second." Together, they entered the building. Stephen presented the evidence: the video of Ernest, the financial records, the audio confession. The detective who took their statement, a grizzled man named Torres, listened with grim focus. "This is strong," Torres admitted, But if your sons know you've gone to the police, you'll need protection. We can put in for surveillance, maybe even a safe house. Clarissa shook her head. I won't run. This is my home. Ernest built it with his hands. I won't abandon it to them. Torres studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Then we'll keep an eye on you. But you need to stay vigilant. The next week blurred into a haze of tension. Police began monitoring Charles and Henry quietly, but the brothers seemed to sense the net tightening. They grew bolder, angrier. Charles left voicemails dripping with venom. You're ruining everything. Henry showed up at her door at midnight, pounding until the lights of neighbors sent him away. Clarissa clung to her faith. Her prayers whispered like armor against the dread creeping into her bones. She tended Ernest's garden every morning, the soil grounding her, reminding her she was still alive. One afternoon, as she knelt among the roses, she heard a voice over the fence. Mom. She looked up. Charles stood there, his suit immaculate, his expression unreadable. You don't have to do this, he said. We can fix it. Just stop. Her throat ached. Fix it. You killed your father. You tried to kill me. There's no fixing that. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Regret. No, just frustration. He turned on his heel and walked away. Clarissa sank onto the soil, her tears falling like rain. That night, she dreamed of Ernest. He stood in their garden, smiling the way he had when they were young. His voice was gentle but firm. Fight, Clarissa. Don't let them take everything we built. She woke with the dawn, her grief and fear tempered into steel. For 66 years, she had been a healer, a nurturer, a mother. Now she would be a warrior. Her sons had underestimated her. That would be their undoing. Clarissa had always believed that truth was like a seed. It might lie buried in the dark, ignored or denied, but one day it would break through the soil, unstoppable. Now, as she sat across from Detective Torres in the courthouse office, she watched that seed sprout. We've got enough to move forward, Torres said, tapping the file thick with evidence. Your sons are under investigation. We're preparing warrants for their business records, their accounts. It's only a matter of time. Clarissa's throat tightened. Time, that was what she feared most. Time gave Charles and Henry the chance to strike again. That fear became reality 3 nights later. Clarissa was returning from choir practice, the hymns still echoing faintly in her mind, when she noticed a black SUV parked half a block from her house. Its engine idled, exhaust curling into the night air. Her heart stuttered. She recognized it instantly. Henry's. She forced herself to drive past, pulling into her driveway as if nothing was wrong. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. In the rearview mirror, the SUV's headlights flicked on. She sat in the car, whispering a prayer. Lord, give me strength. Then she grabbed her purse and bolted for the front door. The engine roared. Tires screeched. Clarissa fumbled with her keys as the SUV lurched forward, its headlights bearing down on her like a predator's eyes. At the last second, she dove into the bushes. The vehicle swerved, narrowly missing her porch steps, before speeding down the street. Neighbors' lights flicked on. Someone shouted. Clarissa pressed a hand over her mouth to stifle the scream threatening to break free. The police came quickly. Detective Torres's face was grim as he surveyed the skid marks scarring her driveway. They're escalating, he muttered. We'll assign a patrol car to keep watch. Clarissa, still shaking, looked him dead in the eye. You need to stop them before they kill me, before they kill anyone else. Torres nodded. We're moving as fast as the law allows, but we need you to stay alive until then. The near miss hardened her resolve. The next morning, she called Stephen. They won't scare me, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. If they want to finish what they started with Ernest, they'll have to come through me, and I'm not going quietly. Stephen didn't argue. He simply said, then we'll make damn sure they don't get the chance. Together, they arranged for additional cameras around her house. Stephen even stayed a few nights in his car parked nearby, keeping watch. Still, Clarissa knew her sons weren't finished. The confrontation came sooner than she expected. One rainy evening, Clarissa was tidying the kitchen when a loud knock rattled the front door. Not the hesitant knock of a neighbor. A demand. Her pulse quickened. She grabbed the revolver Ernest had left behind and approached cautiously. Who is it? It's me, Mom, Charles's voice answered. Smooth, persuasive. The same voice that once had charmed teachers and girlfriends, that could sell a lie wrapped in velvet. I don't want to talk, she said, her tone sharp. You don't have a choice. The door shook violently once, twice, then crashed open. The chain lock snapped. Charles strode in, rain dripping from his tailored suit. Henry followed close behind, hood shadowing his eyes, fists clenched. Clarissa raised the revolver, hands trembling but steady enough. One more step, and I'll shoot. Charles froze, a mocking smile curling his lips. Really, Mom? Pointing a gun at your own sons. You stopped being my sons the day you killed your father, she spat. For the first time, Henry's mask slipped, his face twisted with rage. He was weak. He stood in our way, and you were supposed to stand with us. Tears burned Clarissa's eyes, but she refused to lower the gun. You took Ernest from me. You tried to take me. I'll never stand with you. Charles lifted his hands in mock surrender, stepping closer. Listen, Mom. It doesn't have to end like this. Give us the recorder, withdraw your statement, and we'll let you live. Clarissa's voice was a whisper of steel. I already gave the recorder to the police. For the first time, Charles's composure cracked. His smile faltered, his eyes narrowing. You stupid, stubborn sirens wailed in the distance. Blue and red lights flickered against the rain-smeared windows. Charles cursed under his breath. Henry grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the back door. We'll finish this later. The brothers vanished into the storm just as the police burst inside. Clarissa lowered the gun, her body collapsing with relief and terror all at once. At the station later, Torres reassured her. This was their last chance. They know we've got them cornered. It's only a matter of days before we bring them in. Clarissa sat in silence, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She thought of Ernest, of his warm smile, his rough hands guiding hers in the garden. She thought of Charles and Henry as babies, tiny bodies curled against her chest. She had loved them with every fiber of her being, but love hadn't saved Ernest. Love wouldn't save her. What she carried now wasn't just love, it was fury, and it burned brighter than her fear. The next morning, Clarissa stood on her porch, watching the sun break through storm clouds. She knew the battle wasn't over. Her sons wouldn't surrender quietly, but she also knew this. She was ready. For the first time in months, her voice didn't tremble when she whispered, I'll finish this, Ernest. For you, the day of the arraignment dawned gray and cold, the kind of morning that pressed against the bones and whispered of storms yet to come. Clarissa sat in the courthouse lobby, her hands folded in her lap, the hum of voices around her fading into background noise. She had dressed in her Sunday best, a navy blue dress Ernest had once said brought out the glow in her skin, but no fabric, no makeup, no prayer could hide the weight in her eyes. Clarissa shook her head slowly. I have two. They're my sons. If I don't speak the truth, who will? The bailiff called for order. Clarissa rose, legs stiff, and entered the courtroom. Charles and Henry sat at the defense table in orange jumpsuits, a jarring contrast to the suits and ties they once wore so proudly. Yet even shackled, Charles carried himself like a prince fallen from grace, chin lifted, eyes sharp. Henry's bulk was hunched, his jaw clenched tight, anger radiating from him like heat. When their eyes met hers, Clarissa's heart twisted. For a heartbeat, she saw the boys they had been, mud on their sneakers, mischief in their smiles, Ernest's laughter chasing them through the yard. Then the memory faded, and all she saw were strangers. The prosecutor laid out the case with cold precision, the financial records, the inconsistencies in Ernest's death certificate, the secret recordings. Then came Clarissa's turn. She stepped into the witness box, swore the oath with a steady voice, and sat down. The prosecutor asked gently, Mrs. Caldwell, can you tell the court what happened to your husband? Clarissa's gaze swept over the jury, then landed on the floor. Her voice was soft but clear. My husband, Ernest Caldwell, was poisoned, not by strangers, not by accident. He was killed by our sons, Charles and Henry. A murmur rippled through the room. Charles smirked, but Henry leaned forward, his knuckles white against the table. The prosecutor nodded encouragingly. And how do you know this? Clarissa's throat tightened. She reached into her purse, pulling out the recorder. Because I heard them confess, with my own ears. The audio played, the venomous voices of her sons filling the courtroom. Gasps erupted. Even the judge's face hardened. Clarissa sat stiff, her hands folded tightly, her gaze never leaving the jury. The defense tried to discredit her. You're an elderly woman, the lawyer sneered. Isn't it possible you misheard? That your grief made you imagine things? Clarissa straightened, fire in her eyes. I may be old, but I'm not senile. I know my sons' voices. I carried them in my womb. I raised them in my home, and I know what I heard. The lawyer tried again. Mrs. Caldwell, Do you expect this court to believe a mother would testify against her own flesh and blood without ulterior motive? Clarissa's voice broke, but she forced the words out. I expect this court to believe the truth, and the truth is, my sons killed their father out of greed, and they would have killed me too. Her words hung heavy in the air. When court adjourned for recess, Clarissa stepped into the hallway, her knees weak. She braced herself against the wall, tears burning her eyes. Stephen touched her shoulder. You were incredible in there. She shook her head. I betrayed them. No, Stephen said firmly. They betrayed you. They betrayed Ernest. Don't confuse love with blindness. Clarissa wiped her tears, nodding slowly. The second half of the trial was a blur. Forensic experts testified. Bankers confirmed suspicious withdrawals. Neighbors recounted overhearing arguments, fights, threats. The mountain of evidence grew higher, heavier, crushing the defense beneath its weight. But the hardest blow came on the final day, when the prosecution revealed a new witness, an old friend of Henry's who had been present the night Ernest collapsed. I was at their house. The man testified nervously. I saw Henry pour something into Ernest's drink. I didn't say nothing back then, 'cause, well, Henry scared me, but I can't keep quiet no more. The courtroom erupted. Henry shouted, lunging forward, only to be restrained by guards. Charles cursed under his breath, fury twisting his face. Clarissa closed her eyes, her heart breaking anew. The truth had finally burst into the open, ugly and undeniable. The jury deliberated for 2 days. Clarissa spent each hour pacing her garden, whispering prayers among Ernest's roses. When the verdict came, the courthouse was packed. Guilty, the foreman declared, on all counts. Charles sat stone-faced, but his jaw muscle ticked. Henry roared, slamming his fists against the table, his face contorted in rage. The judge's gavel pounded. Clarissa sat frozen, the words echoing in her skull. Guilty, guilty. It was justice. It was closure, but it felt nothing like victory. That night, Clarissa sat alone in Ernest's chair, the house too quiet, the shadows too long. Her sons were going to prison. Her husband was gone. The life she had built over 66 years had shattered like glass. And yet beneath the grief, the guilt, the exhaustion, there was a flicker of peace. She had spoken the truth. She had fought for Ernest. She had fought for herself, and she had survived. The verdict echoed long after the gavel fell. Guilty. The word followed. Clarissa home, whispering through the empty halls, clinging to the curtains Ernest had hung decades ago. She should have felt free. The law had spoken. Justice had prevailed. But freedom did not taste sweet. It tasted of ashes. Every night, she lay awake in Ernest's old chair, listening for sounds that weren't there. The creak of floorboards, the hushed laughter of boys long grown, the sharp bark of Charles's anger, the heavy footfalls of Henry's rage. She had lost them once to greed. Now she had lost them forever to prison. One evening, Detective Torres came by to check on her. He stood on the porch, his hat dripping from the rain. They've been sentenced, he said, life without parole. You can breathe easier now. Clarissa forced a smile. Thank you. But after Torres left, she sat alone in the kitchen, her tea untouched. Breathe easier. She would never breathe easy again. Weeks passed. The garden flourished, roses blooming in fierce defiance of her grief. Clarissa found solace among the blossoms, her hands buried in soil Ernest had once tilled. Then, one crisp autumn evening, as she pruned the hydrangeas, the phone rang. She answered. Dan froze. Hello, Mother. Charles's smooth voice purred through the static. Her stomach dropped. How are you calling me? He chuckled softly. Prison walls don't stop ambition. We still have friends, you know, loyal ones, ones who don't take kindly to betrayal. Her hand tightened around the receiver. You got what you deserved, did we? His voice darkened. You'll see soon enough. The line went dead. Fear returned like a storm cloud. Every shadow stretched too long. Every creak of the house made her flinch. She reported the call, and Torres promised to investigate, but his eyes betrayed worry. Don't take any chances, he warned. If you feel unsafe, call me immediately. Clarissa nodded, but dread had already rooted itself in her bones. But the attack came 2 nights later. Clarissa was reading scripture in the living room. When glass shattered in the back, she jumped to her feet, revolver in hand. 2 men in black masks stormed in, hired muscle, Charles and Henry's friends. Clarissa's pulse thundered. She raised the revolver. Get out of my house. One lunged toward her. She fired. The shot echoed through the house, the intruder collapsing with a cry. The second man cursed, charging. Clarissa stumbled back, her finger tightening again. The gun roared, smoke filling the room. Both men fell, writhing, bleeding. Sirens wailed in the distance. Stephen had installed an emergency alarm system linked to the police. Clarissa stood trembling, the revolver shaking in her grip. She had defended her home, but the weight of what she had done crushed her shoulders. When Torres arrived, he found her still standing there, gun in hand, eyes glazed with shock. "They sent them," she whispered. "My boys sent them." Torres gently took the gun from her fingers. "Not your boys anymore, Clarissa, just criminals. And you stopped them. The courts tried, the masked men. One survived, and under oath, admitted the order had come from Charles and Henry inside prison. It sealed their fate. Even tighter extra decades added to their sentences. Stricter confinement. But for Clarissa, the damage was already done. She walked through the house at night, haunted by the echo of gunfire, by the memory of Charles's voice on the phone, by the faces of the sons she had loved and lost. Spring came. The roses bloomed again, brighter than ever. Clarissa knelt in the garden, the soil cool against her skin. She closed her eyes, breathing in their fragrance. "Ernest," she whispered, "I kept my promise. I fought. I survived." A breeze stirred the petals, brushing against her cheek like a kiss. She opened her eyes, gazing at the horizon. Life stretched ahead, quieter now, lonelier, but hers. She had been a wife, a mother, a survivor, and though grief still clung to her, so too did strength. In the end, Charles and Henry had underestimated her one last time. They had tried to break her. Instead, she had endured,